Good evening, Facebook. This is Dr. Sharon H. Porter, and this is Leadership Matters with Dr. Sharon. I am just so elated to have my guest here today. He is Mr. Kelvin Oliver. He is an educational consultant. He is also the CEO of Leaving Village, which I love that title. I can't wait to get into that name. And he's also a former elementary principal, and he hails from the area of Dallas. So I'm so excited to have you here tonight. Welcome, Mr. Oliver.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And I just gave just a few little nuggets about your background, but please take the opportunity to share more about who Kelvin Oliver really is.
All right. So I do live in Dallas right now, but I came by way of Mississippi. I was born and raised in a small town called Waveland, Mississippi on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And I have a very unique background in the sense of I spent pretty much all of my schooling in private school, but I spent all of my education in public school, as far as in my career in public school. And so I was able to really get a vantage point, I guess, from being in Mississippi. Came from a middle class family, but the thing about being in Mississippi and where I live, there weren't really a lot of people, particularly from my background, that were African American, that pretty much had the same upbringing as me, as far as two parents in the home and having the same financial standing. And so I was able to see both sides continuously. Like there wasn't a side to be able to go and this is who I play sports with, and everybody intermingled together. And so it really gave me perspective, and to be able to see that the reality of it is that it seems like life just wasn't fair. Life wasn't fair for everybody. And sometimes I even felt guilty to an extent, like, why is my life the way it is? And so I never wanted to be a teacher. My mom was a teacher. And so that's completely where I never wanted to end up in education. But life has a strange twist. And so I ended up, when I moved to Austin, I ended up becoming a special ed teacher. And I was just going to do it for a year and got in there, and I just fell in love with it. I'm a problem solver, and I think the ultimate problem solving is working with special ed kids with learning disabilities, because you're consistently trying to figure out how to unlock this puzzle. And when you do it, it's rewarding for you and for them. And so I taught special ed for 2 years in Del Valle ISD at elementary school. Then I moved up to Fort Worth and taught in Crowley ISD as a sixth grade math teacher for the next 3 years. Became a math specialist on the campus. Moved over to Richardson ISD in the Dallas area, where I was a curriculum specialist for 2 years, where I went and I coached and did professional development for special ed teachers for the 40 elementary schools. And from there, they asked me to become an assistant principal at one of the campuses. And that's where I first became introduced to restorative practices. After being an assistant principal, I took a principalship last year in DeSoto ISD, a southern suburb of Dallas, at an elementary school. And at the end of the principalship, I got a call from the consultant I worked with when I was an assistant principal, and they said, we would like you to come on board to work with us in doing restorative practices. I called my principal from back then, and that's really, I would say that's the biggest testament to mentorship. I asked her, I said, what should I do? Because I really didn't want to make the decision myself. And she said, she's an assistant soup, and she said, you can always come back to being a principal, but this opportunity may never come to you again. So based on those words, I took the leap and never looked back. And so I've been happy ever since.
That's really amazing. And I really want to delve into Leaving the Village, LLC. Please tell us how you formed that and what services you provide in Leaving the Village.
All right. So Leaving the Village actually came from the first professional development I ever did was a instructional technology. I was asked to do it back, I would say, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And so I did the training for the campus I was on. And after I walked away, I was like, why? Like, we have all this technology and nobody knows how to use it. And I had just watched this movie, The Village. And I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Village, but basically the premise of the movie is that the movie is about, there's this people, there are these people living in this forest, and they're scared and they're stuck in this forest based on these monsters. And then all of a sudden, at the end of the movie, they realize that they're in a contemporary society. So there's cars, roadways, and all these things. But what the choice they made was to go back into the village and never tell anybody what they found. And that's how the metaphor I've always used for education. Like, we have access to so many different things, but we continuously revert back to what we know. And we're afraid to really pursue what really is going to help us move forward, and is really putting us at a detriment, because our kids are needing us to push forward and get out to where society really is. And so that's where Leaving the Village came from. And so what I offer at Leaving the Village is I focus on consulting and restorative practices. And if anybody doesn't know what restorative practice is, basically restorative practice is focused on teaching the mindset of relationships back in schools, and focusing on the relationship between student to teacher, teacher to teacher, administrator to teacher, parent to teacher, and getting people to stop seeing each other as their identified roles and as the actual person. A person goes through different things. So there's a story behind everybody who walks into the building, from the time they woke up to the time they get into the building. And so a teacher may have a flat tire. That's going to impact you on how you interact with other people, and how other people should interact with you. Now, a lot of times when a teacher walks into a building, they're asked to be a superhero and put all the real life things behind them. But when you're going through something, you're really going through something. And so if we can acknowledge that, we should also acknowledge that for our students. Our students are coming to us with so many things. And if we can see them for who they are and what they may be experiencing, that'll really help us be able to connect with them and get them to understand, get them to do what we ultimately need them to do, and that's achieve. But first, we need to connect with them. And so what restorative practices focuses on is a focus on proactively building relationships. And then when those relationships have been tested or broken, we're focused on repairing those relationships. And then if you have a student that is needing a little extra, you figure out, okay, what are some specific strategies and needs that this student may have that we can potentially use to get them to change their behavior. It's a focus of changing behavior rather than punishing for the sake of punishing.
Absolutely. And I know that several school districts have been using restorative practices for several years now. But there are a lot of schools and school leaders, school districts who are just now beginning to actually implement restorative practices. What would you say to those individuals who are just beginning to implement and introduce that to their schools and their students and staff?
Right. So the one thing you have to do is you can't look at it as if it's a fix-all for your school. You have to look at it from, first, you have to change your mindset as a leader. The leader has to have the mindset of, this is what's best for kids, and this is what's best for our school. And so the first thing is, if you're the person that says, that it's zero tolerance, if a student does this, this is what has to happen, so we kick this student out, they get into a fight, then restorative practice is going to go by the wayside at that very moment, because that's going to be the expectation of the teacher. You are going to get pushback when you don't necessarily suspend kids for doing something that people feel they should be suspended for. But one of the mistakes a lot of times people make is they don't communicate with the teachers as to what they're doing. That's not just restorative practices. That's pretty much a lot of initiatives that we're pushing in the school. I think if teachers understand why you're doing something, and you you communicate with them, and you be transparent about what you're doing, they can get on board with it. Everybody's not going to get on board with every initiative you do anyway, but you'll get more people, because a lot of people think from this perspective. It's just a matter of getting them to understand that you don't have any true ulterior motives in what you're doing, and that you're doing really what's best for kids. And so the thing they need to focus on is developing a team that can help push this initiative out, and then make sure that team has a valid voice within that initiative. So it can't be they just come to a meeting and then you push everything to them. There needs to be a voice from, what's the teacher's perspective on this? What is the climate of the school? That's why you put the team together. So there needs to be a team. And sometimes you may need an outside voice to come in and communicate the message that you're trying to communicate when you're trying to do such a major shift like this. That's what I did when I was an assistant principal. My principal and I, we were pushing the initiative, but we said that they're not listening to us. So we had to bring in somebody else to communicate what we were already trying to communicate. And then the teachers allowed us to really push forward because they're like, okay, that's what you were trying to get us to see. And from there, giving teachers responsibilities and roles to be a part of the process. We did weekly professional development where teachers were leading that professional development. So when we trained those particular teachers on how to do a circle, we had those teachers training the other teachers on how to do a circle. It's funny how when an administrator tries to teach something versus when a teacher tries to teach something to a peer, how there's so much different there's different level of reception to it. Just like if a student tries to teach something to another student, there's a different level of receptiveness to that than when it's the teacher. So just empowering those teachers, because when you empower them, they become your most vocal people. And I would say the biggest piece is your parents. Your parents need to know exactly what you're doing. There needs to be an understanding, and there needs to be training for the parents of, okay, this is what we're doing, and this is how it's going to impact your child.
Awesome. And we have a question from Karen Davis. She says, have you published any books?
I have not published any books, but I do have videos.
Okay, so you need to talk to me after this because we're gonna get you a book published. How about that? Thanks, Karen. We have another question from Dr. Brittany Clinton. She says, what advice would you share to a new teacher to a district in a Title I school that's extremely low?
So the advice I would say is connect with your kids. You need to understand them more than they need to understand you. One thing about kids is kids read people better than anybody else. So if you walk in the room and you seem scared of them, they can tell that. If you walk in the room and they see that you don't care about them and you're just there, they can tell that. If they sense you genuinely like them, they will genuinely like you. And the one thing that I think sometimes we make the mistake of is thinking that we have to like sing one of their songs or we have to do one of their dances in order for them to be able to embrace us. That's not really what it's about. They really just want you to genuinely like them. You may be the only person in their life that they trust, that genuinely likes them and genuinely cares about their best interest. These kids are broken in a lot of ways when you're working in those types of schools because they're going through a lot at home. Every kid's going through a lot, but these kids are going through, school is literally their safe haven. So you can create that atmosphere for them by just creating an environment of where they want to be. Like I never understood, like when I was in school, I could not wait till Friday so I can have the weekend. A lot of the kids, particularly in school that you'll be working in, they can't wait till Monday and they resent Friday. They don't want Friday because they know that there's going to be a lack of consistency in their life. So you just have to be able to understand that perspective of those students, and you'll pretty much be able to do whatever you need to do with them if you can do that.
And, that's very important because one of the things I had the opportunity to interview my county, Prince George's County State's Attorney last Sunday, and her initiative is really on truancy and all of these things to help our middle school and high school students. And one of the things that she said that was so pertinent, and I really feel that restorative practices speak to, is we have to know when to lift our students up and when to lock our students up. And that restorative practice really speaks to ridding of the school to prison pipeline.
Correct.
Is really what it does. And so I want you to talk a little bit about how we as educators, educational leaders, can really get in there and implement the restorative practices so that we can do what we can do for students.
All right. So the primary thing that you have to do as an educational leader is understand that the way you were raised may not necessarily be the way that these students need to be raised. I think we, particularly, and I'll even speak pretty frankly, I think sometimes Black educators, we think that because we were paddled when we were kids and our parents gave us whoopings and we did this, we did that, we don't embrace some of these things that we consider to be soft sometimes, and we're being soft on kids. And I think we're doing our kids a disservice in this particular area, because I think our kids lack a lot of those skills that they need in life because they're not getting those skills when they're at home. And so communication is the number one skill you're going to need when you get into the real world. Like, hands down, you're going to need to be able to communicate when you go for a job interview. You're going to have to talk to people and different things of that nature. And so where we have to do is we have to have the mindset of, what are we going to do when it comes to building relationships with kids? But also, we're going to have to model that by building those relationships with the teachers. And we're going to have teachers not feel pressure to, if they are building relationships with kids, to feel like they're going to be penalized for doing that. And so if a teacher is doing a circle in the classroom, that should be encouraged by the administrator and not necessarily chastised by the administrator. Because if you punish a teacher for doing that, then you're punishing them for doing probably the most effective thing they can do with the student. And so as an administrator, what you really should be doing is building in time for your teachers to build relationships with their students. Because if you have a teacher that is struggling with management of their classroom and struggling to be able to deliver instruction in the first place, then she's going to have a problem, or he or she is going to have a problem anyway, and they're not getting any instruction accomplished in the first place. So if they can build that connection with their students, and then we can also give them some classroom management strategies, and that's when they'll truly be able to see the rewards of the instruction that we continuously push them to push out. And so the administrators have to also not be willing to push back at what our social norms are. Our social norms are, when a student does something wrong, we need to suspend them. That's how generally we feel. So when this happens, but what we really need to do is figure out what happened and figure out how we can make the situation right. Now, I'm not saying punishment needs to go out the window. You definitely punish, but it's more under, instead of consequences, more under accountability. And so one thing I used to do, so if two students, like for example, I teach this. So if you have two students that get into a fight, you can suspend them for 3 days. And that's generally what sometimes, in Texas, we do 3 days because that's the max you can do. So of course, when they fight, people get 3 days. I think in Chicago is 10 days. So that's why they give them 10 days. So there's no rhyme for reason in that in the first place. But what I used to do was this. I would give detention 3 days that week. And so if you got into a fight, you had detention 3 days. The first it was a 2-hour detention. The first hour, we did some type of community service. So we would sit there and you would help clean up the school, different things of that nature. The second hour, we circled. We circled about, okay, how do we get into this situation? Okay, what could we have done differently? And how can we make this right? The next day, you come back to detention. Now you work on a character building project together. Now the students would become conflict resolution specialists, and then they would sit together and they would figure out, okay, how can we do a presentation to present to our classmates that were part of the process of us getting into the fight? We're going to do a presentation to them to show them what we did, and then also how they impacted us to get into the fight. Because the number one thing that a lot of kids say is, well, we fought because we didn't really want to fight, but we felt so much pressure from everybody else. So what you do then on that, what I would also do for the third day is, if you don't get in trouble for those 2 particular days, and you don't get in trouble the third day, I won't even make you come the third day, so you can earn your way out of the third day. Then you would do, and as long as you did the presentation before your classmates, what that did was that involved everybody in the process. The students had had an opportunity to earn their way out of trouble. And most importantly, you're not putting them in the system. You're not setting them down the school to prison pipeline, because you're giving them accountability, but at the same time, you're giving them an alternative that actually works on changing the behavior instead of focusing on punishing them just for the sake of punishing them.
Awesome. And so, Kelvin, do you work with individual schools or do you consult with entire school districts? What's your method? Both. Okay. So please share your information in case individuals are interested in finding out more information or finding out how they can get you as a consultant.
No, absolutely. So you can go, if you want to see examples of my work, you can go on YouTube. I'm at Leaving the Village on YouTube. That's my YouTube channel. You can also go to my you can go to my business website. You can go to leavingthevillage.com, or you can go to kelvinoliver.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn at Kelvin Oliver. On LinkedIn, I post videos 3 days a week. So Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 5:30, I post a new video from a training that I did that week or previously. And I'm on Twitter at Leaving Village.
Okay. Okay, Leaving Village. Yes, and that's 5:30 Central Time. That you.
Right. Yeah, I post them 5:30 Central Time.
We just finished talking about that. That is awesome. I tell you, and that is really what caught my attention to you is the work that you're doing around the whole restorative practice and really trying to get the mindset change, because that's really what it is, changing the mindset of those individuals. And you even mentioned that if a leader doesn't suspend, that teacher is really upset. And it's really helping, just change that whole mindset of punishment. And really responding to the needs of our students. So that's really all it's about. And so finally, this is Leadership Matters, Kelvin. So please tell us, in your opinion, why you feel leadership matters.
I think what leadership matters, but I think where leadership matters is I think sometimes people wait till they get a title to be a leader. And I think that you can be a leader at any point in your career. And I think what will impact the type of leader you will become is if you choose to lead before you get the title than when you get the title. Because all the title is, it gives you permission to be a leader, where that doesn't necessarily give other people permission to follow your leadership. And so really people follow your leadership based in your actions and whether or not they believe in you and what you're saying and what you're saying that we should do. And so I think one of the biggest mistakes that I think a lot of people make with their career is they wait to become a leader when they get the title of becoming that leader. And so for anybody who's an assistant principal or a principal, I would just go back to being an assistant principal. The one thing I did when I was assistant principal, I understood my core values. I didn't want to suspend kids. Like, I knew that was something I did not believe in. But I also knew that I couldn't just sit there and go, oh, I'm not going to suspend kids. But I saw that there were opportunities. Okay, restorative practice is something that was just adopted by the state of Texas. This is what I believe in. So I did everything in my power to get restorative practices on my campus. And I pushed through my district, and I said, this is what I want. And the one thing you'll learn is if you take on an initiative and you take charge of something that other people won't, that will progress you in your career much faster than waiting for permission. And so you don't have to be a rebel, but what you do have to be is aggressive. And aggressive in saying, you know what, I want to do something different that'll help me stand out. But ultimately, it's best for kids. And so if you can align those things, you're going to get wherever you need to get.
Very good. And Karen wants to know, are you on Facebook? Do you have a presence on Facebook?
My Facebook page is Leaving the Village as well.
Okay. There you go, Karen, Leaving the Village. Awesome. I so appreciate you taking the time out this evening to share with us all of your knowledge, and definitely listening and viewing audience, please contact him if you are in need of his services. He's giving you information. And Kelvin, I hope that you will drop your information in the comment section after we get off in case people would like to follow you or connect with you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So I will definitely look forward to all the work that you have, and I enjoy your videos. So I'm going to continue watching those. Absolutely. And guys, again, this has been another wonderful interview with a wonderful leader in education, Kelvin Oliver. Again, he is the owner and founder of Leaving the Village. His specialty is restorative justice and restorative practice. So I hope that you connect with him. And so thank you, Kelvin. I hope you have a good night, but just stay with us because we need to talk after this. Everybody have a wonderful, wonderful evening, and always know that leadership matters.